Nobody tells you that growing up is just a long, slow process of learning which people in your life see you as a person and which ones see you as a resource. Some people figure that out in their 20s. I figured it out at 11:52 on a Tuesday night in March 2024, when my phone lit up on my kitchen counter and my sister told me, not asked, told me, that her kids were coming over in the morning. My name is Charles Becker. I'm 28 years old. I live alone in a one-bedroom apartment in the Virginia Highland neighborhood of Atlanta, Georgia. I work in UX design for a mid-sized tech consulting firm downtown. I wake up at 6:15, make coffee, commute on MARTA to the Midtown station, and spend my days designing the things that other people interact with without ever thinking about who built them. I am not a babysitter. I want to be clear about that, because by the time this story is over, someone in the comments will say, "But they're your niece and nephew. What's the big deal?" And I want to get ahead of that right now. I love those kids. I genuinely do. That's not the point. The point is that nobody, and I mean nobody, gets to walk into your life, assign you a job, and back it up by saying someone else gave them your key. That's not family. That's a management structure you never agreed to join. Here's the background. Because the text message didn't arrive in a vacuum, nothing that happens in a family ever does. My sister's name is Christina Becker. She's 34 years old. She's married to a man named Troy Waverly, 37, project manager for a general contracting firm in Roswell. They live in a 4-bedroom house in Sandy Springs, about 18 miles north of my apartment. They have 2 kids, Jalen, who's 7, and Nora, who's 5. Nice kids, smart kids, kids who deserve parents who plan ahead. That last part is where the problem lives. Christina and Troy have a habit, not occasional, not situational, a habit of making last-minute decisions and then finding other people to absorb the consequences. In the 2 years I'd lived in Atlanta, I had watched this pattern from a closer distance than I wanted. She'd book a weekend trip and realize on Friday afternoon she had no childcare. She'd schedule date nights and then ask my mother if she could take the kids overnight. She'd accept work obligations that conflicted with school pickup and then call people in a panic at 3 p.m. When those people said no, she'd escalate to my father. My father's name is Harold Becker. He's 61 years old, retired from 28 years as a postal supervisor, and he lives about 4 miles from me in the Decatur area. Dad is a good man in the way that some good men are also frustratingly passive. He doesn't like conflict. He believes family means showing up. And when Christina told him she needed someone dependable who could take the kids in an emergency, he didn't see a red flag. He saw a son who lived close to his daughter, and he solved a problem the way he always solved problems. Without asking me first, I found out about the key in the worst possible way. Christina's text came in at 11:52 p.m. on Tuesday, March 12, 2024. I was sitting at my kitchen table working through a wireframe for a client presentation the next morning. The message read, "Hey, my 2 kids are coming over tomorrow morning. Watch them. Troy has a site inspection, and I have a deposition prep that got moved to 7 a.m. They'll be there by 7:30. I read it twice to make sure I hadn't misunderstood the tone. I had not misunderstood the tone. I typed back, "No, I'm not home tomorrow. I have a client presentation." Her reply came in 47 seconds. 47. She was not asleep. She had been waiting to see if I would comply before she had to deploy the backup argument. "Doesn't matter. Dad gave me your keys. We'll figure it out." I set my phone, face down on the table. I sat there for about 30 seconds, very still, in the way you go still when something happens that you didn't quite believe was possible until it did. She has my key. My father gave her my key. Neither of them asked me. The key had a simple origin. 8 months earlier, in July 2023, I had a minor medical procedure. Outpatient, nothing serious, but I needed someone to check on me that evening. I gave my dad a spare key. He brought me dinner, made sure I wasn't dead, and I told him to hold on to it in case of a real emergency. That felt reasonable. That felt like the kind of trust that's supposed to exist between a father and a son. I had not given him permission to hand it to anyone else. I had not given Christina access to my apartment. I had not been consulted. I had not been informed. It had just happened. Quietly. and they had both banked on me not finding out until her kids were already standing at my front door. That was the plan. Just arrive, make it a fact. Count on Charles not causing a scene in front of two small children. I want you to notice something about that strategy. It's not spontaneous. It requires knowing your target well enough to predict that they'll fold under social pressure. Christina knew I wouldn't yell at the kids. She knew I wouldn't turn them away once they were on my doorstep at 7:30 in the morning with their backpacks and their sleepy faces. She had engineered the situation to make my no irrelevant. The problem with that strategy, and I say this with the calm of a man who had about 4 hours to think it through, is that it requires the key to still work. I picked up my phone. I opened my building's resident app. My apartment complex, a mid-rise on North Highland Avenue, with a keypad entry system and a leasing office that handles maintenance requests, has a 24-hour emergency line for security issues. I wasn't sure if my father gave my sister my key without permission, qualified as a security issue, but I figured I'd let them decide. The woman who answered was named Deb. Patient, professional, and not remotely rattled when I explained the situation. She confirmed that the building could dispatch an emergency locksmith for a cylinder rekey before morning, and that the cost would be added to my account. I agreed. Someone would be there between 1 o'clock and 2 a.m. Then I called my building's overnight security desk and left a note on my account. If a woman arrived in the morning claiming to drop off 2 children, security was to inform her that no one had authorized entry and that she needed to call me directly. After that, I took screenshots of every message. Then I sat back down at my kitchen table, looked at my wireframe, and thought about how I was going to explain all of this to my dad. The locksmith arrived at 1:20 a.m. Efficient, quiet, done in 12 minutes. When he handed me the 2 new keys, I held them for a moment longer than necessary. One for me, one for no one else. Not yet. I finished my wireframe at 2:45 a.m. It was good work. Sometimes pressure clarifies things. My alarm went off at 6:15 a.m. on Wednesday, March 13th. I made coffee. I put on my work clothes. I sat at the table and waited, because I knew what was coming. At 7:04 a.m., my phone rang. Christina. I let it ring. She'd find out what she needed to know soon enough. At 7:28 a.m., I got a text. We're almost there. Can you buzz us up? I did not reply. At 7:41 a.m., I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I answered it. It was Marcus, the morning security officer at my building's front entrance. Mr. Becker, there's a woman here with 2 children. She says she's your sister and she has a key to your unit. The key isn't working on the front entrance panel. She's asking me to let her up. Thank you, Marcus. Please let her know I'm aware she's there and that she'll need to reach me by phone if she needs to speak with me. Copy that. I hung up. I put on my jacket. I picked up my bag. I had a presentation in 2 hours and a MARTA train to catch. I want to be honest about something. Standing in my kitchen in those few minutes before I walked out, I felt the pull. That familiar, low-grade guilt that comes from being in a family where being helpful is treated like a character trait you were assigned at birth. Those are real kids downstairs. They're confused. Nora's probably cold. Jalen's probably hungry. I thought about all of that. And then I thought about Christina, planning this from her couch last night, typing that message with the calm certainty that I would open my door and absorb her problem because she had arranged it, so I had no other choice. I walked out. I found out what happened at the building entrance from Marcus when I came home that evening. Christina had tried the key twice, once on the outer panel, once directly in the callbox override slot that older buildings still have. Neither worked. She had then called my phone 4 times. I had it on silent during my presentation, which went well, by the way. According to Marcus, she stood in the entrance alcove for about 12 minutes before she called Troy. Troy, who was already at his site inspection in Roswell, could not leave. She had then called someone, he wasn't sure who, and eventually left with the kids. Jalen had asked Marcus if he knew where I was. Marcus told him I wasn't available. Jalen apparently nodded seriously and said, "That happens with Uncle Charlie sometimes." I nearly smiled when Marcus told me that. 7 years old, and already more understanding about it than his mother. My phone, by the time I got it off silent at noon, had 6 missed calls, 3 from Christina, One from Troy, one from a number I recognized as Christina's mother-in-law, Brenda Waverly, who had apparently ended up taking the kids, and one from my father. I called my dad back first. That was always going to be the conversation that mattered most. My father answered on the second ring. He has a specific voice he uses when he knows he's done something he shouldn't have. A slightly lower register, slower than usual, like he's choosing each word the way you'd choose your footing on a slippery surface. He used that voice when my name came out of him. Charles. Hey, Dad. A pause. Your sister called me. I figured she might. Another pause. Longer. She's upset. I know. The kids had to go to Brenda's. I know that too. There was a silence on the line that I let sit. My father is a man who fills silence eventually, and I had learned a long time ago that patience was a better tool than pressure when it came to him. I was standing outside the MARTA station at 5 Points, briefcase in hand, watching pigeons ignore each other on the sidewalk. Finally, his voice came back smaller than usual. I should have told you I gave her the key. Yeah, Dad. You should have. Your sister told me it was for emergencies. A babysitting conflict at 11:52 at night isn't an emergency. It's a scheduling failure. He let out a long breath. I know. I handled that wrong. This was the part I had been thinking about all day, because my father wasn't malicious. He wasn't scheming. He was a 61-year-old man who had spent 30 years as a mediator between other people's problems, and he had applied that same instinct to his own children in a way that was well-intentioned and genuinely harmful. Dad, I kept my voice even. You gave someone a key to my apartment without telling me. That's not a small thing. That's my home. I understand. If Christina had used that key to walk in when I was there, or when I wasn't there, and something happened, I would have had no legal footing. She wasn't on my lease. She wasn't on my approved entry list. Nobody knew she had access, except the two of you. Another long pause. I didn't think about it that way. I know you didn't. I wasn't trying to punish him. I genuinely believed he hadn't thought about it that way. That was the problem. I need you to understand that giving someone access to my apartment is my decision, not yours. Not Christina's. Mine. He was quiet for a moment. Then, in a smaller voice than usual, are you going to change the locks? Already done. Last night. He made a sound that might have been a sigh or might have been something else. Okay. That's fair. That was enough from him for one conversation. My dad doesn't do grand confessions. He does small, quiet acknowledgments, and this was one of them. I took it. Christina, however, was a different conversation entirely. She called me again at 6:45 p.m., and this time I answered. She didn't start with hello either. She started with, do you have any idea how embarrassing that was? I sat down on my couch. Here we go. Which part? I asked. Standing in the lobby of your building with 2 children while your security guard told me you weren't available. Jalen was asking questions the entire time. Charles. He didn't understand why he couldn't go up. That sounds really hard. And I meant it, in the flat, factual way that you mean something without agreeing with the conclusion someone else is building from it. Are you serious right now? Christina. I kept my voice steady. What time did you text me last night? Silence. What time? It was late. It was 11:52 p.m. And you didn't ask me. You told me. And then when I refused, you told me it didn't matter because Dad gave you my key. I needed help. You needed someone to absorb a problem you created by not planning ahead. Those aren't the same thing. You're being dramatic. They're your niece and nephew. I know who they are. I also know that Jalen being at Brenda's house this morning is not my fault. It's a direct consequence of you not arranging childcare for a commitment you knew about in advance. I could hear her breathing change. Sharper. The way it does when she's deciding whether to get angrier or shift tactics. She shifted tactics. Mom is very upset with you. And there it was. The escalation I had been waiting for. In our family, if Christina couldn't win an argument directly, she imported reinforcements. Mom can call me herself? Anything else? You think this is funny? I think it's Wednesday, and I have a full day of work tomorrow, and I need to eat dinner. I'm going to go do that. Charles, Christina, I kept it simple. I love Jalen and Nora. I'm happy to be involved in their lives in ways that we actually planned together. What happened last night, the late text, the demand, the key, all of it, is not something I'm going to accept as normal. So if you want to talk about what that looks like going forward, I'm here for that conversation. But not tonight. She hung up. I made pasta. My mother called the next morning. Her name is Vivian Becker. 59, retired middle school teacher, and a woman whose ability to frame any situation as a character test for the person she disagrees with is genuinely impressive. She opened with, "I raised you better than this." I had made a second cup of coffee specifically for this conversation. "Good morning, Mom." "Do not good morning me. Christina called me crying last night. Troy called me. Brenda called me. You embarrassed the entire family over a babysitting request." It wasn't a request. That's the part everyone keeps skipping over. She needed help. She needed help at midnight after making a plan that required me to accept it without being consulted, using a key that Dad gave her without telling me. That's not asking for help. That's drafting me. "You sound so cold. You sound so cold." I had heard that one before. In my family, having a boundary had a specific name. And it wasn't healthy. It was cold. It was selfish. It was "you've changed since you moved to Atlanta." "Mom." I kept my voice steady. "If someone walked into your house without asking, using a key someone else gave them, would that feel okay to you?" Silence. "That's my apartment. That's my home. I didn't give Christina a key. Dad did. Without telling me. I found out by text at midnight." A longer silence. "Harold told me what he did. He admitted it was wrong." "I know. We talked. Christina is your sister, and she still doesn't get to walk into my apartment without my permission." Those things are both true at the same time. My mother didn't answer that. She shifted the way she always did when the logical ground got too firm. Those children needed someone, and they found someone. Brenda was there. Everyone survived. That's not the point. What is the point, Mom? Another silence. Then, quietly, more carefully, "I just don't want you to grow distant from your family." And that right there, that sentence, was the most honest thing in the whole conversation. Not anger, fear. The fear that me having a boundary was the beginning of me leaving. That if I didn't absorb the inconvenience, I would eventually disappear. I softened, just slightly. "I'm not going anywhere. I'm still here. I still love all of you. I just need everyone to understand that my apartment is my space, and my time is my time, and those things require a question, not a command." She was quiet for a moment. "I'll talk to Christina." I didn't know then whether she would or wouldn't, but she'd heard me. That was a start. 2 days after the lobby incident, I did something I had been putting off for months. I made a list. Not a venting list, not a list of grievances to present to anyone. Just a private accounting. The way you might audit any system you'd let run unexamined for too long. I opened a note on my laptop and started writing down every time in the last 2 years that I had rearranged my schedule, my money, or my space to accommodate someone in my family without being asked. The number that came out wasn't dramatic. It wasn't $11,000 the way it might be in someone else's story. I was 28, and I hadn't been in Atlanta long enough to accumulate that kind of debt to people. But the time was there. The unpaid favors were there. The late nights I'd spent helping Troy review contractor documents because he knew I could read technical copy quickly. The weekend I spent painting Christina's spare bedroom because they were in a rush before a family visit. The 3 times I'd driven 40 minutes to Sandy Springs to take the kids so Christina and Troy could have a night out. Always last minute, always framed as a treat for me because I love the kids. And I do love the kids. That was always true. That was also always the mechanism. What I understood, sitting there with that list on my screen, was that I had been living in a family that had quietly sorted me into a role. The available one, the responsible one, the one who didn't have a spouse or kids yet, and therefore had capacity. Nobody had announced this. Nobody had voted on it. It had just calcified over time, assignment by assignment, until the night my sister texted me a command at midnight, and was genuinely shocked when I refused. The lock on my door wasn't just a lock. It was the first time I had put something physical between my life and the assumptions that had been piling up around it. 3 weeks after the lobby incident, things in my family had settled into a new and slightly uncomfortable silence. My father had called twice more. Both times he was warmer than the first call, less defensive, more like himself. He told me he'd spoken to Christina and told her directly that what she'd done was wrong, not just the text, but the whole arrangement, using his key, assuming my availability, not informing me. I asked him how that conversation went. She was defensive, but she heard it. When your sister gets defensive, it usually means she's processing. I'd take that. My mother had done what she'd promised and talked to Christina. What exactly was said in that conversation I'll never fully know, but the result was measurable. Christina did not contact me for 2 weeks. When she did, the tone was different. Not warm, not apologetic exactly, but measured, smaller somehow. Like someone who had been reminded that their voice didn't carry quite as far as they thought. Her message came on April 3rd, 2024. Hey, I want to apologize for the way I handled that night. I shouldn't have texted you like that. It wasn't cool. I sat with that for a while. I want to be accurate about how it felt, because people in comments expect these moments to be either triumphant or hollow, and the truth is it was neither. It felt like watching a window open in a room that had been sealed for a while, not warm yet, just air. I replied, I appreciate that. Thank you. She wrote back, can we talk this weekend? Not about the kids thing, just talk. My answer was yes. We met at a coffee place on Ponce de Leon Avenue in the Ponce Highland area, about a 10-minute walk from my apartment. It's a neighborhood spot, mismatched chairs, good drip coffee, a chalkboard menu that changes every few weeks. I got there first. Christina arrived 5 minutes later, no kids, wearing the slightly tired look of a person who had been running too hard for too long. She sat down. She ordered a latte. She looked at me the way older siblings sometimes look at the younger one, not quite sure when you grew up enough to stop needing them to be right. I talked to Dad, she opened. I know. He told me some things I didn't want to hear. A pause. He said he should have asked you before he gave me the key. He was right. Yeah. I want you to know that I didn't think of it as your key. Exactly. She stopped herself. That's not an excuse. I just mean, I thought of you as family, and I thought of the key as a family thing. I know that was wrong. I thought about how to respond to that carefully, because it wasn't entirely wrong, the instinct behind it, the belief that family shares resources, but the application had been broken. Family is a reason to ask, not a reason to skip asking. She looked at the table. Yeah, a beat. I've been doing that a lot, haven't I? It wasn't really a question, so I didn't answer it like one. You've been under a lot of pressure. Troy's schedule, the kids, the job. I know it's a lot. It is. But that's not your problem to solve. I looked at her. That was a real sentence. That was the sentence I had been waiting to hear for about 2 years. No, it's not. She wrapped her hands around her mug. I've been thinking about what you said on the phone. About drafting you. She almost smiled. That was a good word for it. You're a lawyer's paralegal. You know what drafting someone means. She actually laughed at that. Short, surprised, real. The first easy moment between us in a month. I'm going to do better. That's all I need. And I meant it. I want to use this part of the story to talk about something that doesn't get enough airtime when people discuss family dynamics and personal boundaries. And I think it matters, especially for people in their 20s who are newly independent and navigating exactly what I was navigating. When you're the youngest sibling, or the single one, or the one without kids yet, you often become the family's lowest stakes ask. You're the one with flexibility. You're the one who can help out. And if you've been raised to be responsible and caring, which are genuinely good traits, those traits get quietly borrowed by the people around you and returned as obligations. Nobody does this consciously, usually. Christina wasn't a villain. My dad wasn't trying to violate my privacy. My mother wasn't trying to gaslight me. They were operating on a pattern that had never been interrupted, and so it kept running. What I did the night I changed my locks wasn't dramatic. I didn't yell. I didn't threaten. I didn't post anything publicly or send a family group chat manifesto. I just interrupted the pattern. And when you interrupt a pattern that people have come to rely on, the first response is always going to look like anger or betrayal or hurt. That's not evidence that you were wrong. That's just what disruption looks like before adjustment. What I learned, and what I'd want anyone in a similar situation to hear, is that protecting your space is not the same as withdrawing your love. These are separate things that families sometimes conflate, because it's easier to say you don't care about us than it is to say, I relied on you without asking and now I have to adjust. Consent matters inside families too. Privacy matters inside families. Your apartment, your schedule, your money, these are yours. Choosing who has access to them isn't selfishness. It's self-respect. And self-respect modeled clearly and consistently teaches the people around you something important. That you are not an unlimited access. That there are terms. That love doesn't mean unlimited access. That's not a cold lesson. That's a healthy one. By May 2024, 2 months after the lobby incident, the family dynamic had shifted into something more honest, not transformed, not healed in some cinematic way where everyone cries and apologizes in a well-lit living room. Just more honest. My dad and I had started having Sunday phone calls. Short, easy ones. Sports, weather, what we'd been cooking. Once he asked me how to reset his router, and we spent 20 minutes on it together. That was better than any formal reconciliation. Normal conversation, freely chosen, is its own kind of repair. My mother backed off in the way that proud women back off. Not by saying she was wrong, but by stopping the behavior. She no longer called to relay Christina's grievances. She no longer opened calls with how other people were feeling about me. When we talked about her book club, about her garden, about a home improvement project she and Dad were doing in the spare room. It was smaller than before, also lighter. Christina followed through. In May, she texted me to ask, and I want to be precise, to ask if I'd be willing to take the kids on a Saturday afternoon while she and Troy went to a friend's wedding. 4 days' notice. A question, not a statement. She mentioned she was also asking Brenda and that either option worked. Yes. Jalen and Nora came over on a Saturday in late May 2024. I took them to Piedmont Park, about 1.5 miles from my apartment. We walked around the lake. Nora picked up every interesting rock she found and asked me to hold them, so by the end I had about 11 rocks in my jacket pocket. Jalen decided a bench was a boat and narrated the voyage for 20 minutes. I bought them ice cream from the cart near the 10th Street entrance. They ate it too fast and complained about brain freeze with the kind of theatrical suffering that only 7- and 5-year-olds can fully commit to. On the MARTA ride back to my place before I drove them home to Sandy Springs, Jalen looked up at me. Uncle Charlie, why is your apartment so quiet? Because I live alone. He thought about this for a moment. Don't you get lonely? Sometimes. But mostly I like it. He nodded seriously, the way kids nod when they've decided to accept an adult answer even though they're not fully satisfied with it. Okay, I'd miss Nora. I know. She'd miss you too. Don't let her hear me say that. He grinned. The last thing I'll say about all of this is something I keep coming back to, because I think it's the part that actually matters beyond my particular story. A key is a small thing physically. It weighs almost nothing. You lose them under couch cushions. You make duplicates without thinking twice. But a key to someone's home represents something that doesn't weigh nothing at all. It represents trust. It represents the decision, made consciously, to give someone access to the place where you are most unguarded, most yourself, most private. When my dad gave Christina my key without asking me, he didn't just hand her a piece of metal. He made a decision about my privacy on my behalf. He decided that his convenience, not having to mediate the conversation, not having to deal with potential conflict, was worth more than my right to choose who enters my home. He didn't mean it that way. I believe that absolutely. But intention doesn't change impact. The door still opens. What I did by changing the locks wasn't about being petty or punishing anyone. It was about restoring something that had been taken quietly and without notice. My right to decide. If you're listening to this and something in it sounds familiar, if you've got a family member who volunteers your time, borrows your space, or bypasses your answers by going around you to someone else, I want you to know something. The discomfort you feel when you first say no is not a sign that you're doing something wrong. It's the sound of a pattern breaking. It's loud at first. It gets quieter, and on the other side of it, if you do the work, is something worth having. Your home, your time, your yes given freely, because you chose to give it, not because someone decided you didn't have a choice. I changed the locks on a Tuesday night in March 2024, in a one-bedroom apartment in Virginia Highland, Atlanta, Georgia. In the months that followed, I watched my family adjust, argue, process, and slowly, imperfectly, incompletely, but genuinely, grow up a little. And so did I. If you liked this story, join our community by hitting that like button and subscribing for more family-centered accounts like this.